What happens when one of television's most experienced anchors decides she's had enough of carefully crafted royal narratives and throws the rulebook out the window? What happens when years of polished media training collide with raw, unfiltered questioning that cuts straight to the heart of every controversy? This is the story of how Lara Spencer completely dismantled Meghan Markle's composure during what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview on Good Morning America, creating one of the most shocking moments in morning television history. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure you subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrity interviews that go completely off script. Now, let's get into what really happened during those 20 minutes that had viewers across America glued to their screens. The Good Morning America studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy, but there was something different in the air. That morning, Lara Spencer sat across from Meghan Markle, who had arrived for what everyone believed would be a standard interview about her latest charitable initiatives. The lighting was perfect, the cameras were rolling, and millions of viewers were tuning in for their morning dose of celebrity news. Welcome back to Good Morning America. I'm here with Meghan Markle, and we're going to talk about your new foundation work. Lara began, her professional smile in place. But anyone who knew Lara well could see something flickering behind her eyes, a sharpness that suggested this interview might not follow the usual script. Meghan settled into her chair, radiating the polished confidence that had become her trademark. Thank you so much for having me, Lara. I'm really excited to share what we've been working on. Of course, Lara nodded, shuffling her notes with deliberate precision. But before we get to that, I think our viewers are curious about something else entirely. There's been quite a bit of discussion lately about your relationship with the truth, Meghan. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered. I'm sorry, could you clarify what you mean by that? Lara leaned forward slightly, her journalist instincts taking over. Well, let's start with your recent statements about feeling isolated within the royal family. Yet we have documented evidence of numerous public appearances, charity events, and family gatherings during that time. How do you reconcile those two things? I think there's a difference between being present somewhere and feeling supported, Meghan replied, her voice maintaining its careful modulation. Physical presence doesn't equal emotional connection. That's an interesting distinction, Lara said, her tone growing more pointed. But isn't it also interesting how these feelings of isolation seem to have developed primarily after certain privileges were restricted, after it became clear that the full royal lifestyle came with actual responsibilities and limitations? Meghan's posture stiffened. I'm not sure what you're implying, Lara. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly, Lara shot back. You've built a narrative around being victimized by an institution, but what about your own actions? What about the staff members who left? What about the demands that reportedly included wanting to change centuries-old protocols? The studio fell silent, except for the hum of cameras. Meghan's media training kicked in as she attempted to redirect. I think it's important to focus on the positive work we're doing now rather than relitigating past misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? Lara repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Is that what we're calling them now? Because the reports I've read suggest they were much more than misunderstandings. They suggest a pattern of behavior that contradicts the image you've carefully constructed. Lara, I'm here to talk about my foundation work and the causes I care about, Meghan said, her voice taking on a slightly harder edge. I'd appreciate if we could focus on that. But Lara was just getting started. Of course, and we will. But surely you understand that credibility matters when you're asking people to support your causes. And credibility becomes questionable when there are so many inconsistencies in your public statements. What inconsistencies specifically? Meghan asked, though her tone suggested she knew exactly what was coming. Lara consulted her notes with theatrical precision. Well, let's see. You've spoken about wanting privacy while simultaneously courting media attention. You've talked about financial struggles while living in a mansion. You've claimed to know nothing about the royal family while having demonstrable knowledge of royal protocols and history. Should I continue? Those are gross oversimplifications of complex situations, Meghan responded, her composure beginning to crack. Context matters. Context does matter, Lara agreed. So let's provide some context. You signed a multi-million-dollar deal with Netflix, another with Spotify, wrote a best-selling book. and yet you've positioned yourself as someone who was left with nothing. How does that work exactly? The tension in the studio was palpable. Meghan shifted in her seat, her hands clasping and unclasping. Success after leaving doesn't negate the difficulties I experienced while I was there, but it does raise questions about motivation, doesn't it? Lara pressed. About whether the difficulties were as insurmountable as presented, or whether they were simply incompatible with certain ambitions. I think you're being incredibly unfair, Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. You're twisting everything I've said. I'm not twisting anything. I'm asking questions that millions of people have been thinking but were too polite to ask, Lara replied. Questions about accountability, about responsibility, about the gap between public statements and documented behavior. Meghan looked toward the cameras, then back at Lara, clearly calculating her next move. I didn't come here to be attacked. You're not being attacked. You're being interviewed by a journalist who's actually doing her job instead of lobbing softball questions, Lara said, her professional mask finally slipping to reveal genuine frustration. The American public deserves better than carefully crafted talking points and victim narratives that don't add up. My experiences are not narratives, Meghan snapped. They're real, and they were painful. I'm sure some of them were, Lara conceded, but pain doesn't excuse inconsistency, and it doesn't excuse the impact your actions had on other people. What about the pain you caused? The question landed like a bomb. Meghan stared at Lara, speechless for several long seconds. The cameras captured every micro-expression, every slight tremor, every sign that the carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. When Meghan finally found her voice again, it came out as barely controlled fury. How dare you sit there and lecture me about causing pain when you know nothing about what I went through? Lara didn't flinch. I know what you've told the public you went through, but I also know what the people around you went through, and somehow that never makes it into your version of events. Why is that? Because this isn't about them, Meghan shot back. This is about systemic issues, about racism, about an institution that refuses to modernize. There it is, Lara said, leaning back in her chair. The race card? Right on schedule. Tell me, Meghan, when exactly did you discover you were biracial? Because it seems like that revelation coincided remarkably well with when you needed a defense. Against criticism, the studio went dead silent. Even the crew members seemed to freeze. Meghan's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. Excuse me. You heard me, Lara continued, her voice steady and uncompromising. For years, you identified as Caucasian on official documents. Your acting headshots, your resume, your early interviews, all presented you as a white actress. But suddenly, when it became convenient, when it provided a shield against legitimate criticism, you discovered your heritage. How convenient. That is absolutely disgusting, Meghan said, her voice shaking with rage. You have no right to question my identity or my experiences with racism. I have every right to question inconsistencies in public statements, Lara fired back. Just like I have the right to question why your experience of racism seems to have magically begun only when you entered the royal family, despite decades of life before that. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I will not sit here and listen to this. Sit down, Lara said firmly. You came on this show to promote yourself and your causes. The least you can do is answer some honest questions. About your credibility, my credibility. Meghan laughed bitterly, but she remained standing. This from someone who works for a network that peddles celebrity gossip as news. Nice deflection, Lara observed. But we're not talking about the network. We're talking about you and your pattern of rewriting history to suit whatever narrative serves you best at any given moment. I have never rewritten anything, Meghan insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. Really? Lara pulled out another sheet of paper. Let's talk about your wedding then. You've claimed that you had a private ceremony with the Archbishop of Canterbury before the public one. But the Archbishop himself had to clarify that what you're describing was a rehearsal, not a legal ceremony. So why did you present it as something it wasn't? Meghan's face flushed. That was a misunderstanding of terminology. Was it, though? Or was it another attempt to create a romantic narrative that positioned you as somehow more authentic than the public ceremony? Another way to suggest that the real you was hidden from the world. You're twisting my words, Meghan said, finally, sitting back down but perching on the edge of her chair as if ready to flee. I'm using your words, Lara corrected. Your exact words from your own interview, just like I could use your exact words about not knowing anything about Harry before you met him. Despite evidence that you had posted about him on social media and had expressed interest in meeting him to mutual friends, Meghan's composure was completely gone now. Everyone does research when they're going to meet someone. Research? Yes. But you claimed ignorance. You built an entire narrative around being this innocent American who stumbled into a fairy tale, without knowing what she was getting into. But that wasn't true, was it? It was true, Meghan insisted weakly. Come on, Meghan, you're a smart woman. You were an actress. You understood media. You knew exactly what you were getting into. The naive act was just that, an act, wasn't it? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Meghan looked trapped, cornered by her own contradictions, and Lara's relentless questioning. You want to know what I think? Lara continued. I think you went into that family with a very specific agenda. I think you believed you could change centuries of tradition to accommodate your vision of what a modern royal should be, and when you discovered that wasn't going to happen, when you realized that being royal meant serving the institution rather than the institution serving you, you crafted an exit strategy that would allow you to keep the benefits while shedding the responsibilities. That is completely false, Meghan said, but her voice was barely above a whisper. Is it? Because everything that's happened since suggests otherwise? The carefully timed interviews, the strategic revelations, the way you've monetized your royal connections, while simultaneously criticizing the very institution that gave you those connections. It's quite brilliant, actually, if you can get away with it. Meghan looked directly into the camera, her eyes filling with tears. I came here in good faith to talk about important causes, and instead I'm being subjected to character assassination. You're being subjected to journalism, Lara shot back. Real questions about real inconsistencies in your public statements. If that feels like character assassination, maybe you should examine why. Because you're not asking questions, you're making accusations, Meghan said, her voice breaking slightly. I'm asking you to account for your own words and actions, Lara replied. If that's uncomfortable, perhaps it's because those words and actions don't hold up to scrutiny. Meghan wiped her eyes, but the tears seemed calculated rather than genuine. You clearly came into this with an agenda. My agenda is the truth, Lara said simply. Something that seems to be in short supply when it comes to your public statements. The truth. Meghan laughed bitterly. The truth is that I've been vilified from day one by people who decided they didn't like me before they even knew me. And yet, here you are, financially successful, with a platform that millions of people would die for, married to a prince, living in luxury, Lara observed. If this is what vilification looks like, where do I sign up? The cutting observation hit its mark. Meghan flinched as if she'd been slapped. Money doesn't erase emotional trauma. No, but it does raise questions about how traumatic the experience actually was, if you're still leveraging it for profit. Lara replied without missing a beat. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas, and for a moment, it seemed like Meghan might actually walk off the set. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles went white. When she finally spoke, her voice was ice cold. You want to talk about leveraging trauma? Let's talk about how this network has built an entire business model around exploiting people's pain for ratings. Nice try, Lara said, completely unfazed. But we're not talking about the network's business model. We're talking about yours. We're talking about how you've turned personal grievances into a multi-million-dollar brand. Everything I've done has been about helping other people, Meghan insisted. But even she seemed to know how hollow it sounded. Has it, though? Lara leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Meghan's face. Because when I look at your foundations, financial records, when I examine where the money actually goes, it seems like a lot of it goes toward maintaining your lifestyle and paying your staff. How much of those donations actually reach the people you claim to be helping? Meghan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Those are operational costs. Every charity has operational costs. Of course they do, but most charities don't spend 70% of their donations on operational costs while the founders live in $16 million mansions, Lara replied, consulting her notes. Most charities don't pay their founders six-figure salaries for part-time work. That's not accurate, Meghan stammered, but her denial lacked conviction. Which part isn't accurate? The mansion? The salary? Or the percentage of donations that actually reach beneficiaries? Lara pressed. Because I have the documents right here. Meghan looked desperately toward someone off camera, presumably her, publicist or manager, but Lara wasn't done. Let's talk about your Netflix deal while we're on the subject of monetizing your royal connections. Lara continued relentlessly. You've produced exactly what, in the past 3 years, a documentary. That was basically an extended therapy session and a cartoon about yourself. That's it, for $40 million. Creative projects take time, Meghan said weakly. Do they? Because other creators seem to manage multiple projects in that time frame. Unless, of course, the real product being sold wasn't content, but access to royal gossip and family secrets. Is that what Netflix was really paying for? That's completely unfair, Meghan protested, but her voice cracked on the words. What's unfair is taking money under false pretenses, Lara shot back. What's unfair is using your children as props in a media strategy while claiming to want privacy for them. What's unfair is destroying relationships with family members and then profiting from telling your side of the story. My children are not props, Meghan said, finally showing genuine emotion. Don't you dare bring them into this. You brought them into this, Lara replied without hesitation. Every carefully staged photo, every strategic mention, every time. You've used their existence to humanize yourself while simultaneously keeping them away from their grandfather and extended family. You made them part of your brand, Meghan. Tears were streaming down Meghan's face now, but Lara pressed on. And let's talk about that family estrangement, shall we? You've painted yourself as the victim of a cold, unfeeling institution. But what about your own family? Your father? Your half-siblings? People who knew you long before you became a duchess. What's their crime? Why are they also cut off? My family situation is complicated, Meghan managed through her tears. Complicated how? Because they won't stay silent about your behavior. Because they refuse to play along with your victim narrative. Because they remember who you were before you reinvented yourself. You don't understand, Meghan sobbed. Then, explain it to me, Lara challenged. Explain how everyone who's ever been close to you eventually becomes the problem. Your father, your half-siblings, the royal family, former friends, former staff members. At what point do you look in the mirror and ask if maybe, just maybe, you're the common denominator? The question hit like a physical blow. Meghan doubled. Over slightly, her composed public persona completely shattered. I think, she said through her tears, I think I need to go. Of course you do, Lara said, her voice softening slightly but remaining firm. Because when the questions get too hard, when someone actually holds you accountable, you run. Just like you ran from Toronto, just like you ran from London, just like you'll probably run from California. When the novelty wears off and people start asking harder questions, Meghan stood up again, this time with clear intention to leave. This interview is over. The interview is over when I say it's over, Lara replied calmly. You agreed to come on this show. You agreed to answer questions. The fact that you don't like the questions doesn't mean you get to leave. Watch me, Meghan said, taking a step toward the edge of the set. Go ahead, Lara, called after her. Run away. It's what you do best. But just remember that millions of people are watching. They're seeing exactly who you really are when the cameras are rolling and you can't control the narrative. Meghan froze, 1 foot already off the interview platform. The calculation was visible on her face, weighing the humiliation of staying against the humiliation of fleeing. Sit down, Meghan, Lara said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been doing this for decades. Finish what you started. Show some dignity. Slowly, reluctantly, Meghan returned to her chair. But she was broken now, the fight completely gone out of her. I want people to know, she said quietly, that I never meant for any of this to happen the way it did. But it did happen, Lara replied, her tone gentler now, but still uncompromising. And intentions don't erase consequences. They don't heal the relationships you've damaged or restore the trust you've broken. I know, Meghan whispered. Do you? Because your actions suggest otherwise. They suggest someone who believes she's always the victim, never the perpetrator. Someone who thinks good intentions excuse bad behavior. Meghan looked up at Lara, her makeup streaked with tears, her carefully constructed image in ruins.
What?
Do you want me to say? I want you to tell the truth, Lara said simply. Just once, without spin, without manipulation, without making yourself the victim. Just the truth. The two women stared at each other across the small space between their chairs, the weight of the moment settling over the studio like a blanket. Meghan opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, the truth apparently too heavy to bear. That's what I thought, Lara said finally, turning to face the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Meghan Markle, who apparently has nothing more to say. The camera held on Meghan's tear-stained face for several long seconds before cutting away, capturing for posterity the moment when one of the most carefully managed public personas of the modern era finally cracked under the weight of real scrutiny. Did you think of this absolutely explosive confrontation? Have you ever seen a celebrity interview go this far off the rails? Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments. Do you think public figures should be held to this level of accountability, or did Lara Spencer cross a line? Your thoughts might surprise you.